This episode is not for the faint of heart. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey guys, Jared here. Although we often feature stories and tips about survival, sometimes it's just not possible. Today we're looking at some more of the worst deaths in human history. Now, I say more because we already did a video covering some pretty horrifying ways to go. If you haven't seen it yet, be sure to check it out after this one. That is, if you can stomach it. What caused a robot to kill a factory worker? Why did rescuers wait 4 hours to pull a man from a steaming manhole? And what did the movie Braveheart leave out about William Wallace's death? We'll uncover all the gruesome details and tell you what not to do to, avoid being added to a video like this. Imagine being killed by a robot. Okay, maybe not so much in the style of the Terminator, but in 1981, a robotic arm killed a man. And sadly, it likely could have been prevented. While working at the Kawasaki Heavy Industries plant in Akashi, Japan, 37-year-old Kenji Urata attempted to fix a malfunctioning robot designed for processing automobile parts. To ensure the plant worker's safety, the robot was surrounded by a wire mesh fence, which had an automatic power switch that turned the machine off upon unhooking it. But Urata decided to step over the fence, and unfortunately, his mistake would end up costing him his life. Although he had set the machine to manual, sources claim that as he hopped into the enclosure, he accidentally hit the on switch. Within seconds, the robotic arm sprang to life, stabbing and pinning Urata against another machine designed for cutting gears. As a robot from the 80s, it wasn't very high-tech, and unfortunately, it did not sense that there was a human obstruction in the way of its task. Other employees watched in horror, unable to stop the attack because they didn't know how to operate the machine. When all was said and done, it was determined that Urata had either been crushed or stabbed to death, but no autopsy reports are available online. Following the incident, the factory installed 6-foot fences around the other robots with an automatic off switch when opening the door. The Japanese government also worked with manufacturers to implement safety measures to ensure something of this nature would not happen again. When working with machinery, always follow safety protocols and double-check that the machine is off when possible. Sadly, a simple error in judgment led to this man's death. Now, reports claim Urata died almost instantly from the blunt force trauma of the attack. Our next entry had a much more prolonged and painful experience.
The victim goes down the manhole cover. It had the stack on it, for it to release the steam, but somehow that gets knocked out of the way and he goes down there and he basically boils to death.
This next story was considered one of the most gruesome incidents that a New York medical examiner, Dr. Judy Melinek, ever encountered in her career. And let me warn you, this one is pretty brutal and will make you watch your next step a little more carefully the next time you're in the big city. Our hearts go out to the friends and family of Kyle McGarity, a 25-year-old New Yorker who was the victim of a terrible accident that should have never happened. Back in 2002, Kyle McGarity, a bartender at the time, went out for drinks in New York City with his neighbor, Keith Masters, and Masters' girlfriend. Things were going well until Keith suspected Kyle was flirting with his partner. Masters then started attacking McGarity, with witnesses telling police they saw a man getting the shit beat out of him. The two got into a shoving match at around 4 a.m. at the corner of Pearl and Fulton, according to the police report.
A woman and a husband say they heard, "Don't break my legs, don't break my legs," all right, and some sort of fight going on right outside here.
Sadly, those are believed to be McGarity's last words. Now, accounts differ on what happened exactly, but it's believed that Masters pushed McGarity into an open manhole covered by a plastic vent stack that had somehow been dislodged. Kyle plummeted around 15 feet into a pool of boiling water. Due to a leak in the water main, enough piping hot water had gathered to fully submerge Kyle. Despite emergency services rushing to the scene, they couldn't do anything, as the temperature was pushing 300 degrees. To make matters worse, they saw Kyle reaching up, screaming for help. It took 4 hours for authorities to reduce the steam and deem it safe enough to enter the manhole, but by then, Kyle was dead. His autopsy revealed just how awful his death was. That medical examiner we mentioned before, Judy Melinek, found that his body temperature was 125 degrees, but noted it was likely higher than the limit of her thermometer. She went on to say McGarrity's body had been steamed like a lobster, and that it was leathery to the touch, twisted and glistening with beads of clear water. It's just awful, guys, and I won't go into any more detail than this. Although Masters claimed the two were just roughhousing and it was an accident, witness reports led to him being charged with second-degree murder. However, for reasons unknown, the charges were later dropped. Now, this is a very specific incident, but I'd say when walking anywhere, always try to walk around open manholes, even closed ones, because, well, you never know. Our next victim suffered a horrific fate for supernatural claims, and truthfully, I have no survival tips for this one. Giles Corey settled in Salem in the mid-1600s. Immigrating from England, the farmer was able to purchase a large plot of land, and many believed he was quite successful. However, he also had a reputation for being a bit of a wild card, with numerous run-ins with the law. For example, Corey allegedly caught a farm worker stealing apples and beat him to death. After being tried, he was found guilty and ordered to pay a fine. Yeah, things were a bit different back then. Fast forward to 1692, and Corey's wife was arrested for witchcraft. We're talking during the Salem witch trials, where your options were to admit being a witch and be executed by hanging, or deny the claims and be executed anyway. Rather than defend his wife, Corey testified against her, but then retracted his claims, which raised suspicion that he too was involved with dark magic. Given his shady history, he was doomed from the start. 1 month after his wife's arrest, Corey was also arrested, but unlike everyone else who agreed to a trial, he simply refused. And this did not go over well with the townsfolk. Those overseeing the trial weren't going to let Corey get away so easily, so they decided to torture him until he confessed to his witchy ways by stacking stones onto his chest. This is a torture method known as peine forte dure, which is French for hard and forceful punishment. Yeah, you could say that again. And it's just as brutal as it sounds. And my French. First he was stripped, then bound by his hands and legs. Then they placed a wooden sheet on top of his chest and started to add heavy rocks one by one. After 2 days of bone-crushing pressure, Giles Corey finally died. Some sources claim his final words were, "Ma, wait." A message to those involved that he'd rather die than admit guilt to witchcraft. As I said before, no survival tips for this one. That's just pure torture, and eventually you die from suffocation and/or your internal organs being crushed. Up next, a death that is considered one of the worst in medieval history, and fit for a king. Back in the early 1500s, a man named György Dózsa led a group of peasants forming a revolution against the ruling class in Hungary. Known for his bravery during the Turkish Wars, thousands volunteered to serve under Dózsa, supporting his movement. Things escalated quickly when the peasants refused to harvest the fields of their landlords, leading to a bloody war. Thousands of these landlords were killed, and the newly formed revolution started to burn down houses and fortresses. As they continued to gain momentum, the Hungarian government stepped in and put an end to the movement. If that's where this story ended, then the group's leader, György Dózsa, wouldn't be featured in our video. But he is, and for good reason. Some consider his death one of the cruelest of all time. Now, there are mixed reports as to what exactly happened to him. To be fair, this was more than 500 years ago, but it seems all accounts confirm that he was killed in a very barbaric way. The general consensus is that after being held prisoner, Dózsa was stripped naked and placed on a scalding hot iron throne glowing orange. To put this in perspective, iron needs to be heated to around 750 degrees for it to start to glow, and that's on the lower end. But that's not all. A glowing hot iron crown was placed on Dózsa's head, while other rebels who were being held prisoner and starved were forced to eat pieces of his flesh. Yeah, absolutely brutal. Some historians think his followers had to bite his flesh off with their teeth, while others claim he was sliced with hot tongs that were used to peel his skin. Either way, it's gruesome, and he felt all the agonizing pain, eventually succumbing to the torture. Of course, those who refused to eat his flesh were killed, while those who followed orders were set free. Now that's a buffet I'll be skipping. Before we move on to some more spine-chilling deaths, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the show. It really goes a long way to keep this channel alive, and not horribly maimed. This next incident happened not too long ago, and our hearts and condolences go out to the victim's family and friends. And for those of you watching, never feel pressure to do something at your job that is unsafe.
My oldest brother was Lawrence Daquan Davis. Everyone called him Day. He was killed at his very first job on the very first day as a temporary worker.
On August 16, 2012, 21-year-old Lawrence Day Davis from Jacksonville, Florida, was just 90 minutes into his first shift at the city's Bacardi bottling plant when something went horribly wrong. Davis was tasked with cleaning any broken glass or bottles that had spilled around a machine called a palletizer, which was used to pack and stack cases of rum. At this point, the machine was switched off. Sadly, while Davis was still cleaning up, another employee, not aware he was below, turned the machine on. Within seconds, the palletizer pushed cases of rum down, crushing Davis. The employees realized he was underneath when they heard him scream out. Despite their best efforts to turn the machine off, it was too late. Lawrence Davis had been crushed by approximately 2,000 pounds of force. Following the incident, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, launched an investigation which determined that Davis and other temporary employees were not sufficiently trained. OSHA cited Bacardi with 12 violations with a total proposed fine of $192,000. When working any job, especially with machinery, always ensure you follow all safety protocols. If you're starting a new job, make sure to ask for clarification when necessary, and I'll say it again, never do anything you're not comfortable doing. Sometimes a simple mistake can turn your entire life upside down. And that's exactly what happened in our next death.
John Edward Jones went on what was supposed to be a day trip into the Nutty Putty cave in Utah County. Tragically, that journey ended up being his last.
On November 24th, 2009, 26-year-old John Edward Jones, his brother, and a group of friends decided to visit Utah's Nutty Putty cave. The group first explored an area of the cave called the Big Slide. But John and his brother felt comfortable exploring deeper, since they had grown up caving as a hobby. This led them to one of Nutty Putty's narrowest passages, the birth canal. Unfortunately, John took a wrong turn and slid into a tight gap, head first, expecting it to open up. It didn't, and he was now stuck, upside down, 700 feet from the cave's entrance. John's brother Josh heard his screams for help and tried to pull him free. After realizing that wasn't possible, Josh knew his only option was to call for emergency services. But he didn't have cell reception in the cave, so he had to make his way out first. Over 27 hours, emergency workers attempted to free John Edward Jones from the 10 by 18-inch crevice in which he was wedged. They tried lubricant, breaking rocks, even a pulley system that, at first, started to work, only to snap and drop him deeper into the hole. Unfortunately, nothing could save John. With blood pooling in his head and putting a strain on his heart, he sadly passed away. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest and suffocation. Following the tragedy, Nutty Putty Cave was sealed, preventing anyone from ever entering it again. It would be John Jones's final resting place. Caving is an incredibly dangerous hobby no matter how much experience a person has. Not exceeding your limits and going with other seasoned cavers can increase your chances of survival. Even then, you're taking a risk when exploring uncharted territory. We did a video featuring the worst caving deaths in which we discussed John's story in more detail. Feel free to check that out if you'd like a more in-depth look. This next death might take the prize as the absolute worst, and it was all in the name of freedom! If you've seen the 1995 film Braveheart, starring Mel Gibson, you know the story of William Wallace. Well, at least somewhat. It's not entirely accurate, especially the way he was executed. Wallace was a Scottish warrior who fought for Scotland's independence from England in the late 1200s. Known for his bravery on the battlefield, he was eventually named Guardian of the Kingdom of Scotland. Though some saw him as a hero, others, specifically the King of England at the time, Edward I, saw him as a real problem. In 1298, Wallace's army of rebels fell to English forces, and Wallace is believed to have fled to France. In the early 1300s, he returned to Scotland, joining rebel forces until ultimately being betrayed. Basically, someone on his side ratted him out. In August 1305, Wallace was arrested, tried, and found guilty of treason. Though Wallace argued he never swore allegiance to the king in the first place, everyone knew he had no chance of walking away. An example was to be made of him, an extreme one at that. On August 23rd, 1305. Wallace was stripped naked and dragged 6 miles by horses through London, while crowds cheered, threw trash, and beat him with sticks. And as brutal as that sounds, it was only the beginning. Once he reached Smoothfield, where he was to be hanged, a rope was tied around his neck, but he was cut loose before he could die. That would have been too merciful. His English captors wanted the pain to continue. After his near-death experience, they cut off his manhood and then removed his intestines, burning them in front of his face. Finally, they cut his heart out. And even in death, they continued to dismember Wallace's remains, cutting him into 4 and displaying parts of his body across England. And to add insult to injury, they cut off his head and put it on a pike for everyone to see on the London Bridge. Just a reminder of what happens when you cross the king, I guess. Truth be told, he may have died after having his intestines removed, but knowing he was alive being dragged 6 miles by horses, hung, cut down, and then having his junk cut off, I mean, I don't even know what to say. If there's anything to take away from this video, it's the importance of workplace safety, as well as knowing your limits when taking part in any dangerous hobbies or activities. Thankfully, there aren't barbaric leaders who torture people in front of large crowds, at least that we know of. Let us know in the comments below if there are any other brutal deaths you know about. Now, as awful as these deaths were, at least some of them were quick. Unfortunately, when it comes to torture, it's meant to inflict as much pain as possible for as long as possible. And that's exactly what we covered in our video, The Most Horrible Torture Methods. So check that out if you're interested. We'll see you next time on How to Survive.